I'm Kevin Sutherland. I'm with Jamie. We're with SI Consulting. Our primary focus is bringing transformation strategy to governments right now. We have a couple of initiatives that are in progress at the moment in the state of Minnesota. Jamie's working on a few initiatives and is going to walk through some of those examples with us. In today's presentation, I'll be talking mostly about why a customer-centric approach may not always result in the outcomes that we want in a government environment or a large enterprise environment. And note that I'm coming at this from the perspective of a strategist, less so from a CX expert or a product expert. I know there are probably people in this audience that are much more expert in those things than me. For background, I plan on talking through some of the two thought leaders' work in this space. Jeff Patton's Outputs versus Outcomes and Impact, which I think is great. If folks haven't seen his video, it's definitely something to check out. And Marty Kagan's 4 product risks, which he talks about and Inspired in many other places. And notice as I recap their work, in my interpretation, when they're speaking about a product model that works well, they're really referring to a model or in the context of software product companies. And at least this is a context it's easier to describe it. And so when I talk about software product companies, I'm referring to a product that sells, or a company that sells a product to a customer. When the customer uses that product, if they like it, they continue to use it and it gives them satisfaction or some level of productivity, and they continue to pay money for it to the company, which is how the company makes money. When Jeff describes the issues that he sees in these environments, he usually points out, or his presentation speaks to 3 main issues, and he talks about the first issue being that there are lots of people in this environment that have tons and tons of ideas. There's the customers that have ideas about how they'd like that product to work differently. There's a team that builds and supports that product who have ideas about how to build that product in a different way. We might have support staff that have ideas about how to better support those customers. We might have sales people out there that want to get new customers, or marketing folks that want to sell that product and have ideas about how that could be brought to new folks. And we might have business stakeholders out here that have great ideas about how we can make more money with the product. And I've left a lot of groups off this list, but you get the idea. There are tons of ideas coming out all the time from all these folks. What Jeff highlights is that with this scope, this is how he's referring to these ideas is scope. This first issue he's calling out is that there's just too many. And so what we commonly do is we put those ideas in a backlog to hold them, because we don't have the capacity to actually complete and produce all of the ideas that we've created. We might organize these ideas into different naming standards. We might call some of them epics. We might call some of them features. We might call some of them user stories. We will spend time prioritizing the ideas, debating possibly about which ones are the more important, figuring out different ways to link them, which ones have parents and childs, and how we should organize them to think about them. But all of that time spent doing that work is often not leading to outcomes because of the second big issue that Jeff points out, which is that most ideas suck and won't result in a customer being willing to pay more for the product that they're using. And that's made worse by the third issue that Jeff points out, which is that we can't tell which ideas are good and which ones are not until we've implemented that idea, given it to a customer, seen them attempt to use it, and find out if they're willing to pay more money for it or not. And on top of that, we're overconfident in our own ideas and skeptical of others, which often makes prioritizing this backlog much more challenging and contentious. And Jeff offers a framework for organizing this in a little bit different of a way. He talks about what comes out of this product work as output. So this is the features, the software products that are produced, the things that are created by the product team. He talks about the benefits that the users get from using that product as outcomes, and the benefits that the company gets as impact. So the profit, the market share, the brand awareness, those sorts of things. And then the solution that Jeff proposes for mitigating a lot of these idea problems is, instead of focusing all of our time and attention on this backlog of ideas, or our time and attention on creating more and more outputs out of the system, he suggests focusing our time on the outcomes themselves, building a list of what those are that are more important, running rapid experiments with that product team to find out which ones are the most effective, which ones lead to that higher level of impact. We know that when we run these experiments, we need to mitigate, according to Marty, 4 product risks. That product needs to be usable. Customers must be able to figure out how to use what they're using to get to an end-to-end process. The product must be feasible. The team that builds and maintains it has to have the skills, experience, capacity to be able to do that. It has to be valuable. Even if a user can use it, it's got to do something that works for them and helps them accomplish something that's a benefit to them. And it has to be viable. It has to fit into the larger organizational ecosystem, meet compliance rules, be part of that enterprise architecture roadmap, that sort of thing. And if we don't mitigate one of these 4 product risks, we might find ourselves with one of those ideas that sucks. And so now with these 2 constructs, we have this recipe for success that's pointed out by Jeff and Marty in the context of this software product company. Really what we have to do is start with these outcomes, find those small experiments that we can run good customer experience practices so that we're finding out what's usable and valuable at the same time, also including the people to ensure that we're making it the changes that are viable and feasible all at once, and running those experiments to improve outcomes. And so while this is very easy to say and write on this piece of paper, it's actually very hard to do, but not out of the question for software product companies that are already organized in a way that facilitates a process that looks something like this. This is not the case for larger enterprises, banks, insurance companies, state and federal governments, which are structured very differently. It gets a lot more complicated. So next we're going to look at a sample of that environment, and I'll walk through a possible government scenario to talk about the similar concepts. And it's usually less about, in this environment, less about selling a product to a free market customer and more about fulfilling a need for a state resident who has few other choices. And so in this example, we're showing a lot of the common capabilities that might be needed to support such a process that sit between the customer and the outcome that customer needs to get to. And you might have noticed I didn't include something to represent impact on this picture, and we can talk about that one later, but that's a whole nother discussion for a state environment. So something else might be noticing here is with those non-product teams, we now have siloed separate groups that could be possibly maintaining these different components that we're organized by. We might be organized by capability, function, even down to system. And what's common to see is breaking this down into further siloed groups. So we might have IT groups like BAs, QAs, devs, QAs. Maybe in a portal silo, we might have a CX group, but we often will see a lot of these different siloed groups across many of the different capabilities or systems that we maintain that all then roll up to further siloed IT structure. And at the same time, we often have siloed business groups for policy, operations, SMEs, those types of staff that exist in these systems that roll up to different business divisions or other siloed business groups with the business structure and management group on top. And it's pretty common even for commercial companies these days. So large enterprises often have structures that match this, or they've tried to do product transformations. They might have something that's like a hybrid of these things. So let's go back to the idea problems described a bit earlier, which are amplified in this environment, because now we have lots of these different capabilities with ideas across the whole life cycle. And one thing that we find is that we have a new issue that's introduced by the structure itself, is that ideas in the different backlogs of these groups, if we have one of these great ideas about what will improve that outcome, we often can't achieve improvement of the outcome unless we can get the other silos to implement something to go along with that idea. And so what happens, we often don't have the authority or the ability to convince those people to implement those ideas. So what we must do is escalate to our management structure to get the other people to do the ideas in those other silos. And this is happening concurrently from all the people that have all the great ideas across all of these different groups, all simultaneously. And what happens is we very quickly overwhelm the management and decision-making structure, which is already overwhelmed by outside forces like legislation, compliance. I mean, we've got a whole lot of legislation that's coming out even right now with the big beautiful bill. Compliance will have security, data breaches, things that can come up as emergencies. We might have EA needs that support this structure that need to be implemented. We might see that a story comes out of the media that results in possibly the governor's office getting interested in many new ideas that weren't on the table before. I mean, there's some of that going on right now as well. And the velocity of change that contributes to better outcomes with all of these ideas being circulated often lowers down to zero. And so when we look at that product risk of value, that life cycle delivering to value is very limited. And the most common response to this in these environments is to add or implement more governance, something to organize and ensure that we're doing all the right ideas that we should be working on in this environment, and figure out how to manage and organize them in many different ways. And one of the other things that governance helps us with is another couple of those product risks. It helps us ensure we're mitigating the feasibility and viability risks in the environment. Do we have the capacity to support this idea? Do we have the budget to support this idea? Does this fit into our enterprise architecture roadmap? Is it compliant with our standards? Governance helps us with that answer. And as you might imagine, governance also does very little to increase the velocity of change that's going through this environment to increase outcomes. It can often make it longer. And so let's say we've heard about product and user-centered design and customer experience, and we've brought in people that might be good at mitigating all those 4 risks, but they're put in a position, possibly on a portal team, where they also don't have the authority to make changes in the other silos to increase value to the customer. They are focused on just making it more usable, is a common thing we see. And if there's one thing that's worse than not talking to your customers, it's talking to them, using their time, capturing their input, learning about what their needs are, and having no way to incorporate any of it. And so we've taken our 4 product risks that should be mitigated together, like we saw in the software product model, and we've scattered them across the organization, which it seems like a big challenge that can't be solved by calling these different silos products, hiring product managers, changing our roles. So what can we do about this problem? How do we fix it? Which is what I'll be talking to next and talking through some examples of. One option is we need to figure out how to create that velocity through the system in a way that mitigates these 4 product risks. And how we do that depends very much on a strategic choice, is whether we're making improvements to these existing capabilities that are here to make it faster, or are we seeking to transform these capabilities into something different? If we're improving the capabilities, I would suggest that the answer is very similar to the software product model, where we really need to figure out a way to assemble a group of people that have the autonomy, the empowerment, and the ability to achieve outcome-driven work. And we pull the 4 product risks and empower that team to be responsible for solving all of those by focusing on outcomes, running rapid experiments, evaluating the results, and pivoting solution ideas based on an outcome-driven approach. However, we might reach a conclusion that we're unable to form such a group, whether that's because of organizational politics, technical reasons, or we might have so much technical debt that it takes us a really long time to make changes through this life cycle. In that case, our only choice might be to look at a transformation route on this, possibly creating new or different capabilities that don't exist today, supported by teams that aren't formed today, and using processes that aren't understood today. And this becomes much harder, and we may not have anyone in this environment that can, if we're looking at new capabilities, that can tell us whether they're viable or feasible until we've decided on what those are and on what that transformation looks like. Transformation is really hard, and it involves significant change. And this is where I spend a lot of our time helping states with strategies on transformation, on this hard piece of doing this. And that might be through very large transformation strategies or very small. And I'll go next through a couple ways transformations are implemented in government, and we'll talk about how we can shift to becoming more customer-centric using a few examples of this that we're working on with the state. All right, the first example, most folks in government can relate to how this is structured. It's very common. We helped with a job application transformation effort with the state where we first came in, did a customer discovery activity, interviewed customers, found out what their needs were, found out what would be valuable to them, and found out what might be feasible, created some options around what a strategy might look like for improving that process. The primary results of that were a conclusion that the current system was at a velocity rate and state at which it needed to be transformed. And so a decision was made to purchase a new product for it. Actually, Annie spent a lot of time on this, doing a market analysis, evaluation of different recruitment solutions on the market, and selected one to move forward, which is currently making its way through the final stages of that governance bar on the right side of this picture. We still haven't gotten to that part, which is actually identifying whether we can mitigate those risks. And we've spent a lot of time making sure that we lower that risk as much as we can, right? So doing some of that upfront work, like finding out what might be valuable, what might be usable through demos, through engaging a team to actually go through use cases with the vendor in advance of actually purchasing and implementing that tool, is still different from putting that tool in front of real users that must use it to do a real thing, that have a job. And so we'll find it is very possible that we find out someone has challenges using it. We might find out that we have a hard time maintaining it, or we might find out politically wise we aren't interested in budgeting what it takes to truly support this going forward. So these are all possible risks that we'll find out soon. Job app looks a little like that. Another much lower complexity scenario we worked on was a customer engagement process that looked at the state's accounting system. And one of the very specific but very isolated pain point came out of those discussions, which was around how staff request access to the ERP systems themselves. And Jamie's been working closely on this.
Kevin just made the case for outcomes over outputs and for testing risk early. So let me bring that sort of back to the ground level with Minnesota Security Access Request project that Kevin was speaking about. And in plain English, this is really how staff get access to different statewide accounting and HR systems. And so here's a real pain. Imagine this, you're a new employee, or you're a supervisor with a new employee, or a new hire who's looking to just access, getting access to the tools that they need to just do their job and get their job done, right? And then imagine being presented with this, right? And you're like, what do I do? Where do I go? What roles do I need? Where do I fill this out? And 12 pages of this. Whew, simple, right? A lot of times what we've found is people or supervisors or folks are like, well, just copy the role of someone else. We'll just make it simple. Well, then what happens then? Now we're over provisioning roles. People are getting roles to things that they don't really need because that person has access, maybe has the right access that this new employee needs, but they also have access to a whole bunch of other things that employee doesn't need, right? So that creates some kind of risk and some auditing risk and some questions. Also, signatures. You'll see a signature page here that this thing's routed through email, right, as an attachment. Some people print it, sign it, scan it, attach it, send it back, and so there's not really this kind of this approval workflow at all. You're trying to track down signatures and make sure by the time you get the complete form, everybody signed it that needs to sign it, and getting that back to IT in one form, in one email is a challenge. Meanwhile, while all of this is happening, your employee, your new hire is still waiting for access so that they can do their job. So our intent was really quite simple. Help people request the right access quickly and safely with clear routing and a clean audit trail. So no treasure hunts, no signature hunts, no guesswork, no over provisioning roles. Here's what we did. We started with discovery, interviewing the customer. These were our customers. The users of this form are essentially the customers in this case. And we sat with supervisors, security admins. We even sat with the IT folks who are actually doing the provisioning and the ones processing the form. And we kind of walked the real path through this PDF document. And then the job to be done became really obvious. Get the right access the first time without decoding acronyms or sending 5 follow-up emails. The next thing we did is we built a proof of concept. to show, not ask. We used an AI to do a rapid prototype, and we just brought something and showed them, like, what if? What if we could give you a web flow with a back-end database that guides your choices, that makes it simpler? Pick which system you want. You don't have to decode through where at in this 12-page document do I need to go to get access to the particular system I'm trying to get access to, right? You just choose your system here. You have 4 choices. Choose which system you want, and then we're only going to show you the roles that matter for that system. And oh, you don't know your agency code? That's okay. There's a drop down for that, right? And just put the plain English name, administration, whatever your agency is. Put that in, and it's going to give you your agency code. Don't have to, no guessing what that is. And oh, you want to copy a user? Well, let's copy a user with guardrails. Let's put some guardrails in place, and let's show you what that user actually has access to. Things like that. Let's route for signatures. So when the first person signs it, can we automate that and have the system automatically send an email to the next person who needs to sign it? And can that person sign it digitally? Okay, they get an email, click on the link, they sign it, and it routes it off to the next person. So no more jumping through hoops and trying to remember who signed this, and then, oh, follow-up emails. Did you remember to sign it? Did you remember to sign it? Oh, I forgot to remind the person to sign it, or I forgot to remind the person who's supposed to remind the person to sign it. Those kinds of things going on. And then all of this information is now being stored in a database. We have this great audit trail at the end. So year end, no longer we're looking through PDF documents. What if you didn't have to comb through emails and spreadsheets to try to figure out, how do I create my audit report at the end of the year? What if you didn't have to do all of that? So we talked to people, we showed them this proof of concept, and we iterated based on what we heard. And people wanted human readable labels. They wanted approver edits without restarting a request. They wanted role templates for common scenarios and various others. And so we just kept the loop moving and talking to them. And finally, we came to the piloting stage. So we piloted it. So this time we took it a step beyond the rapid prototyping a bit. We asked real users to actually use the thing to submit a real request. Side by side with your PDF form with this system, use the thing. And that is where the truth showed up. The feedback that we got in discovery was great, right? We got some surface level things. We got some, yeah, that's a pain, this is a pain. When we did the proof of concept, we went a level deeper with the feedback, like, okay, well, this is a pain. And then when we said, okay, now use it, let's watch you use it, then, oh, a whole level deeper of comments were coming out, like, whoa, pretty soon we had a whole backlog of things we can do to improve this and make it better. Because once they're actually using it, that's when the ideas are starting to flow in their head. They can conceptualize it better because they're not just conceptualizing it, they're actually using it. And that's where we could watch where decisions slowed, where wording was confused, and where the product needed to prevent some common errors right when they happen. So with usability and value evidenced, this is a step we're at now. We're bringing this evidence into governance. And so here, in this case, governance means the project steering committee will present an idea paper and on approval. That's followed by the typical project request process. And sort of in parallel, where we've been consulting on feasibility and viability with Minnesota IT staff. We're trying to estimate size and effort with them. What we learned, so the discovery plus the proof of concept validated value. So is this thing valuable? Does it make life better? Will it save processing time? Improve accuracy? Will it limit churn? People told us straight up that it felt better. They said it was easier to navigate, much clearer, and they were excited about the potential for better status visibility and audit reporting. So the pilot revealed the real usability work. Only in the pilot did we see that deeper friction, ambiguous role names, accidental overselection, things like that. Pilot feedback was sharper and more actionable than what we gathered during discovery and POC sessions. Through this, we learned that proactive beats reactive. So a 1-hour tweak in the pilot, it's going to save many hours of downstream triage, right? If we can get the pilot right, and we're talking to customers often and throughout the process, we're finding out what's working, what's not working, and a small fix now can save a huge bug later. And we always know that being proactive is much cheaper in a business sense. Feasibility and viability need talk and proof. Early consultations gave us a credible t-shirt estimate and flagged integration touch points. Ideally, a short spike with the build team is the right next step to fully retire the feasibility risk before scaling. We'll see, we're heading that direction. But the benefits we realize by doing it this way is that better signal sooner. Discovery in the POC answered, again, is it valuable? The pilot answered, is it usable? With real behavior, not options. Less rework for humans, progressive disclosure, approver edits, and conflict checks prevent common errors at the front door. And then now we have a backlog that matters. Priorities now reflect what the customers actually told us they need, what they, for real people, what are those friction points? More trust, most importantly, more trust. Users saw their feedback show up in the next iteration, and they're like, oh, wow, yeah. Security teams, they saw cleaner, safer requests. So think of customer engagement as us asking two simple forward-looking questions. What might be valuable and what might be feasible or viable? The small CX experiment here that we did is where we put something into real people's hands to see if it's actually valuable and usable. So that's what we did and what we learned and the benefits that showed up.
Yeah, so Jamie talked about an example where we moved the two of those product risks to the left as much as we could, which is proving those out and fewer surprises after we start putting something into motion. And so another effort that I'm working on is a modernization effort where we are looking to transform Medicaid enterprise systems, which is much, much bigger. Most states spend between $500 million and $1 billion doing this, so a little bit more complex than those first two examples that we were talking about. The interesting thing about this example is we've got buy-in on a strategy that does try to attempt to bring all four risks in front of a major decision-making enterprise review board step, and that we can run very quick customer experience experiments with, and as Jamie mentioned, in somewhat of a bake-off mode. And so this is all at the point, we're about here on this one in making that move forward, and it'll be real interesting if we can get something that moves into that for risk validation space. If you're interested in seeing how this plays out, it's all very public. It's out in the the RFI that we released back in July has been out on the street for a bit. Vendors are responding. There's a lot of interest in it, and we have open public meetings with vendor community, and everything's published. And actually, we'll put a QR code at the end if people want to follow what's going on there. So I guess before wrapping up, I did want to come back to the two presentation takeaways that I listed in the beginning. Why in government do we often have struggles with CX and product getting to the outcomes that we're looking for, and how can we change that? So jumping into some of those reasons. One of those reasons is government is not a software product company, and so applying the same exact practices in that space that people have talked about and that work well often will possibly make things worse, might just make things status quo, but it requires some tweaking and rethinking about some of the concepts that are being put out there by thought leaders in the software product company space. The next one, input without action creates frustration. So if we have an end-to-end velocity that's of our life cycle to value that's near zero, customers will be really frustrated with us if we continue to use their time asking questions. And transformation might be needed to improve some of these outcomes, and if it is, it needs to be handled very differently than if we're doing operational improvements in the environment. So those are three big reasons that I think we often run into challenges in this area. And what can we do about it? One, we can recognize the work that we're doing and adjust accordingly. So if we are doing operational improvements, treat that like an operational improvement. If transformation is needed, treat it like transformation is needed. There's a whole lot behind that statement. Focus on outcomes. Do what Jeff says. Don't let the solution be the thing that you're focused on. Focus on why you're making that solution in the first place. And don't ask, show. So like Jamie talked about, create something, put it in front of people, get their feedback based on them using something as opposed to asking them what they would like. And start small. So don't show something at low risk, get feedback on it before proceeding, and do that cautiously. That's everything I had for CX and government. Thank you, everybody.